As an aspiring data analyst, one thing you need to know is that today's job market is significantly shifting to valuing analysts who know how to tell stories with data and know how to generate stakeholder insights and recommendations over those analysts who just have strong technical skills. Just the other day, I was talking to a student and he said that in his technical interview, instead of having him write SQL, the hiring manager actually put some data on the screen and asked him how he would generate some initial insights and recommendations right there on the spot. And this is where most portfolio projects I see fall short. I see lots of dashboards and lots of technical code, but not enough of the actual meat, which is what someone should actually do with your analysis. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to give you a framework for how to think about insights and recommendations on the actual job, and then we're going to dive into a demo where you can see it all in action. Welcome to episode 6 of our Portfolio Playbook series. If you're new here, I'm Christine. I'm a former data director and a hiring manager who helps people become standout data analysts. If that sounds helpful to you, make sure to subscribe to my newsletter below and let's dive in. So first off, what are stakeholder insights? These are findings or recommendations that relay observations about what's happening in the data that relate to another team's goals or strategy. And it's a collaborative process. A lot of times people think, how am I supposed to come up with a final solution as a new data analyst on the job? The thing is, we're usually iterating with our stakeholders by looking at the data, continuing to surface feedback and things that we're finding, and having conversations every week or even every day to decide what we should actually do next together. Generally, the ability to form stakeholder insights comes from two things. Number one, understanding the business metrics that those stakeholders care about. And number two, understanding what levers you can actually pull. If you want to shortcut your understanding of business metrics and how they relate to teams on your job, then download my business metrics cheat sheet below. So in my time as an analyst, I had worked at companies like Deloitte, JustWorks, Oscar Health, and Vimeo. And across the board, I worked with other teams like finance, marketing, operations, business development, and partnerships. Even across all these different stakeholders and all these different industries, I started to see that insights and recommendations tended to fall into three main categories. So there are the insights that are contextual, insights that are directional, and then insights that are actionable. Let's break this down. Now, contextual insights are things that are good to know, but you can't really directly affect them. So for example, think of market trends or COVID spikes or political events that are happening in the world. They're things that give you general awareness and context to why something might have happened, but they're not really things that you can fix by next Tuesday. And directional insights are insights that point to something worth looking into more, but there's not really any strong conclusion about what you should do yet. You can think of things like, well, if there looks like there's a data anomaly or there's missing data, then that's actually something that you should explore more. Or if you see a high level trend, but you're not really sure exactly what's the main driver of this trend yet, then you might suggest that you would investigate this area more deeply. And then lastly are the actual actionable insights. And those are insights that have clear, tangible next steps that you can actually implement. And these actually break into two more categories. There are the short-term, directly actionable insights that you can do something about now. And then there are insights that actually inform changes that happen over the longer term. Things that are a little bit more strategic or harder to implement. In a portfolio project and at work, you're not expected to know how to generate perfect recommendations. The more important thing is that you can show that you know how to think along these different categories. And I also just want to mention that actionable insights is such a buzzword in the world of analytics, but directional and contextual insights are just as important because they frame the background context of your analysis and they help stakeholders also understand why something is happening, even if there's not a direct action that follows from it. So let's dive into an introductory demo where you can get a taste of what this actually looks like. Now, in the last episode, we built a Tableau workbook to start exploring trends across sales, product, and marketing channels for the GameZone dataset. Now, as a reminder, for these last few episodes, I'm using the full GameZone dataset, which we use in my mentorship program, the Analytics Accelerator program. But I have actually made a sample available for you guys to download below so that you can create your own portfolio project and also practice along with us. There's also a few extra products in that sample dataset. So just to catch you up on where we are in this Portfolio Playbook series, in the first few episodes, we were working with the SCAN framework, where we had just noted down what our stakeholder goals were, what kind of columns and data coverage we had, what kind of aggregates and anomalies we were going to look into, and what are some of the notable segments that we wanted to slice our data by. Then in Excel, we created a pivot table where we use conditional formatting and spark lines, as well as some just very simple aggregations of totals and averages to find some initial insights. And that created our initial exploratory analysis where we were documenting those findings on high-level trends. And And then I moved the data to Tableau to do more deep dive analysis into why those initial trends were happening. And so that's formulated our deep dive analysis, where we had some findings that were more specific to different products, different regions, and different marketing channels. So now what I'm going to do is go through my insights log, reflect on what I found so far, and generate some initial recommendations. So the first few insights were about overall sales. Total sales across 2019 to 2022 is 6.1 million, ranging in monthly sales from 80 to 500K. And sales more than doubled in early 2020, with all-time highs in September and December, and they dropped significantly after that, nearing pre-COVID levels. And I can also see this if I look into the overall sales trends in Tableau. So for example, if I got rid of the product name just to see that overall line of what sales look like, I can see the spike in 2020, and since then it's gone down. Now, if you think about it, this insight tells us about what's happening, but there's not enough detail to tell us why it's happening or what we should do about it. And this is usually going to be the case if an insight just focuses on a metric alone. There's no dimension in this metric. I mean, besides the dimension of time. But there's no dimension that we can actually affect, for example, the product, the marketing channel, or the region. And so this is a directional insight, because from this, we could propose to look into the products or the regions that drove that dip. Now, there's also contextual insight here, which is that during the COVID years, there was a huge spike in sales, which confirms our understanding that when people are spending more time at home, they're more willing and able to invest in gaming equipment. So I'm just gonna start noting my initial recommendations here. The first one is to investigate the main drivers of that dip, and that's actually something that's more geared towards the finance or the data team, which is something that we're going to do in this analysis in a bit as well. And then the second is more of a contextual thing, which is just general awareness that when people spend more time at home, there's greater willingness to spend on our kinds of products. Now, following that recommendation, the next thing we started to look at were the top and worst performing products. And what we found was that the top performing product was the gaming monitor, whereas the worst performing was the gaming headset. And the headsets in general are actually responsible for less than 2% of sales. Along the product aspect, we also saw that the gaming monitor, the Nintendo Switch, and the Xbox were the main drivers of the dip, because all three exhibit the same plateauing behavior in 2021 and 2022. So I can see that when I go back to Tableau and I see my sales by product, and you can see for the top three products, they all significantly plateaued or started dipping at the end of 2022, and headsets in general are way at the bottom here. It's actually kind of hard to see them because they make up such a low percent of revenue. So there's a few initial recommendations that can follow from this. Now, one of the low-hanging fruit recommendations you can make is to consider discontinuing the headsets, because it just makes such a low percent of our revenue. Now, when it comes to the dip that we're seeing in the top performing products, so for example, the gaming monitor, the Switch, and also the Xbox, it's definitely too premature to say to just discontinue these products because they're observing a dip. Instead, we would actually dive into these products one level deeper to understand, are there certain regions or channels or other aspects that we can influence to help revive some of these products. And so when we actually split out the products by their different countries, I can see gaming monitor split out by country, the Switch split out by country, and the Xbox which split out by country. I can see that overall, the US is the main source of revenue for all four of these products. But while some of them seem to dip and never really recover towards the beginning of 2023, the gaming monitor and the PlayStation actually do show an uptick and more potential for sales. So a longer term actionable recommendation for the product team could be to push more promotions and sales towards the products that show potential. For example, the gaming monitor and the PlayStation, especially in North America, and to consider shifting that marketing budget or shifting the inventory away from the Switch and Xbox series, which seem to not have recovered since the end of 2022. But of course, we would want more recent data to be able to look into this. So that's something I would note in the assumptions and caveats section in my final write-up for this project. By the way, if you want more step-by-step frameworks for how to stand out as a data analyst, then don't forget to sign up for my newsletter below. Now, one of the next insights we had discovered was about seasonality, where we had noted that December 2020 saw a large spike in sales, where it seems like fall and winter months before the New Year's also just generally perform the best. And this obviously might be related to the holiday sales or the promotions that we run around that time. And I can also see this if I go to my graph of sales split by product, where at the end of every single year, there's a pretty obvious spike. And so I kind kind of want to dive into this a little bit more and see what products are the main drivers of that overall uptick every December. So what I'm actually going to do is combine all of these years together and look at the trends just by the month. So for example, all the Januaries are together, all the Februaries are together, and all the Decembers are together. Now, normally I would not recommend rolling 4 years worth of data together to the monthly level because this tends to hide certain trends. For example, if one year had a really big spike, another year had a really big dip, then you wouldn't really be able to see this. But because we had already confirmed that December for every single year tends to have this spike, I wanted to dig into what products are the main drivers of the uptick. And it's becoming very obvious that it basically happens in the top 4 products, whereas the bottom products just tend to stay very flat and not generate that much revenue. Across these 4 products, there's also a really big spike in the gaming monitor purchases in September. This could be related to starting the school season, where maybe people are buying the monitor to also use for school, where all of the other products that are just for gaming tend to see a really big dip in October before the holiday season spikes again. So one of the recommendations I would give here is directly actionable for the marketing team, which is to run promotions for these top 4 products in the fall season. So in September and October to help manage this dip and also to double down on the uptick that we see during the holiday sales. Now, working through the rest of my insights, I see that all products had a significant spike in sales in 2020 on onwards, following the general trend in total sales, which is a macro or company-wide event. So for example, when we looked at this by regions, we could see that every single region kind of followed generally the same trend, which usually points to something that's a macro event or worldwide event, and is something that is a little bit harder for us to impact directly. It would have been ideal if actually one region showed a very different trend than the other, because this might have been something that we could have looked into further and changed some of our product inventory or shifted what products were available in what regions. So this is more of a contextual insight, and again, just for general awareness. So I'm going to go back to my recommendations log and just make sure that I'm documenting these things as I'm going along. So for the product team, I recommended to remove headsets from the inventory. For the marketing team, I recommended to push more promotions and marketing strategies towards North American sales for the gaming monitor and PlayStation. And then also to double down on winter sales by pushing promotions for the top 3 products in October and November. Now let's look through the other deep dive insights that we had discovered before. So direct is the main driver of all sales. Other channels pale in comparison. I can see this when I go to sales by channel, and I'm seeing that so much of our revenue comes right from direct. And these are people just come directly to the website. So they're not coming through email, they're not coming through a sale, or they're not clicking from like a YouTube ad. They're just entering the website's name. So usually that means organic traffic or people that already are aware of our brand and just enter it directly into their browser. Now, an interesting insight here would be what % of our sales actually comes from these different channels. And I can see that if I change this into an area graph. So I'm going to do that really quickly. Change this to an area graph, change this to % of total, and then I'm also going to shift to calculating by table down. You don't really need to know all the intricacies of why this works, but we can explain it in a further Tableau video in the future. But this shows me the sales mix. We call this mix. So sales mix by channel. And I'm seeing that direct takes up anywhere from, let's see, 70%, 79% to 80% and more of our revenue. Now, as someone who has a little bit of domain knowledge about different marketing channels, I would say that this is a bit unusual. An industry benchmark is to have not more than 25% of your sales coming from direct channels, because obviously your marketing channels should be bringing in a lot of that revenue as well. So one of the first recommendations I would give is something that's more investigative. I would want to talk to the data or the engineering team and understand whether or not attribution is being done correctly, and sanity check this before I make any concrete recommendations. If it's the case that about 80% of our sales come from direct, then a longer term recommendation would be to investigate the marketing channels that we should really invest more time and resources into to make sure that we're not overly reliant on direct sales. So for example, email is one of the very few marketing channels that actually shows an uptick in the end of 2022. And so we could suggest to focus more on email strategy than those other channels like affiliate or social media. So going back to my recommendations log, I've also noted those two down here where I said for the data team, double check the attribution to the the marketing channel is correct because the direct seems a bit oversized. And then for the marketing channel, to focus marketing strategy on email. That seems to have more potential for growth in the later years that we have data for, in order to shift away from that reliance on direct traffic. So as you can see, these recommendations follow directly from your insights, and they range anywhere from general guiding principles and things to look into to very specific things that we should do across marketing channels, products, and regions. And the best analysts do not always have the perfect answer, but they understand how to think out loud, they know how to communicate their process, and they know how to use some of their domain knowledge and understanding of business metrics to relate these insights to real people on the job. Now, one way you can start to do this, if you're not super familiar with business metrics and business context, is to use AI as a learning tool. So after you form these initial recommendations, you should actually use ChatGPT and AI to teach you what the next step would be. So for example, if I go to ChatGPT and I give it my insights and I ask it to generate some initial recommendations, let's see what it says. So here are some clear stakeholder-ready recommendations broken down by product, marketing, and finance. So deep dive into the headset category performance because it looks like data is missing or the performance is really low, right? So those are one of the things that we said. Double down on the gaming monitor line. So the game monitor tends to do pretty well, so focus a little bit more there. And optimize assortment for seasonality. Check out what's happening in December and see if we should actually be focusing on new product upgrades before that season. Marketing team recommendations and then finance team recommendations. And you'll see that ChatGPT actually generates a lot of the same kind of recommendations that we generated just from some common sense. Now, of course, as you start to develop your domain knowledge, your recommendations will become more nuanced and rigorous, but this is a good place to start. Now, even though AI can help generate the text for some of these initial recommendations, you are still going to have to be the analyst who hops into a meeting with your stakeholders, helps explain the data to them, helps them see the reasoning behind your recommendations, and gets their buy-in and gains their trust. And that is the magic that the best analysts are able to do today. So let's summarize what we've done so far in this Portfolio Playbook series. We started high level in Excel using pivot tables, conditional formatting, and some spark lines to see some overall trends. Then we did some deep dive analysis in Tableau where we used simple line charts to understand the why behind these high level trends. And then we documented our insights in our insights log in our Excel workbook. And then we translated these insights into recommendations by understanding if they were contextual, directional, or actionable insights. Now, the final step with any data project is to wrap this all together in a nice write-up or presentation so that you can bring this to life for your stakeholders or to hiring managers. And that is what we're going to focus on in one of the last episodes of this Portfolio Playbook series. And I hope this gave you a glimpse into what stakeholder insights and recommendations look like on the job. And if you want more of my guidance on how to use these frameworks to become a standout data analyst, then subscribe to this channel as well as my newsletter below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.